Hello and welcome to another episode of the AtheroTalk podcast, the podcast series hosted by the EAS Young Fellows. My name is Novák and I am from the second department of internal medicine of St. Anne's University Hospital in Brno and Masaryk University, and I will be your host for today's episode. The recording of this episode takes place just a few weeks before the EAS 2025 Congress in Glasgow in the Kheirkhah Hospital in Copenhagen. Today we have a truly special guest joining us, Professor Borge Nordestgaard, a world-leading expert in lipid metabolism and cardiovascular epidemiology. He is a clinical professor at the University of Copenhagen, at the same time the chief physician at the Department of Clinical Biochemistry in the Kheirkhah Hospital, and also the current president of the European Atherosclerosis Society. Professor Nordestgaard founded Copenhagen General Population Study and is a key figure in the Copenhagen City Heart Study, both large epidemiological surveys whose findings contributed extensively to our understanding of the risk factors of cardiovascular and other diseases. He has authored or co-authored more than 1,000 scientific articles with an exceptional citation record reaching 135,000 citations that reflects his substantial impact on the field. Notably, he is also the recipient of the prestigious Anchikov Prize in 2022 awarded by EAS. So, hello, Prof. Nordestgaard. It is a pleasure to have you here today to discuss your trajectory and your opinion on the future of atherosclerosis research.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
On behalf of the EAS Young Fellows, I would like to thank you as well for accepting our invitation. And in this series of interviews, we want to give our listeners the chance to get you know more personally and more about your academic and scientific career. So could you please introduce yourself to our listeners a little bit? So who is Borge Nordestgaard? What he likes, what he dislikes? What kind of person he is?
Borge Nordestgaard. I'm just a normal person growing up in Denmark, a small country in Scandinavia. I think I was taught by my parents that to be a good person, you should do something that was good for society rather than just focusing on something that's good for yourself. So that's maybe this Lutheran upbringing we have in the Scandinavian countries. So that's what it is. I grew up in the countryside. My parents came from farms, and I had a lovely childhood out in the fields, and later moved to Copenhagen to study. And then I also worked 2 years in the US and 2 years in London, the UK as postdocs. And then I came back to Denmark. Yeah, I guess that's it. I try to do my best. That's basically what I do.
Okay, it's very nice to hear that it is so simple, just to be yourself and try to help. And can you now describe somehow your typical day in your life that you would do every day, or if there is something like such a day?
I usually say when I tell people, why do I do what I do? That's because every day is different from the other one. There's never 2 days that are the same in my life, in my work. So I don't have a typical day.
Okay, and but are there at least some high points or some milestones that you follow each day?
No, but I can explain. So I do travel a lot to many different places in the world for congresses and committees and things, but also a lot privately. I like to travel. But when I'm here at Kheirkhah Hospital and come to work, then of course I do have a typical day here. That would mean getting up in the morning, have breakfast with my wife, and then I take my bicycle and I bicycle to work. It's probably between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on which route I take. I prefer to take a route where there's no cars, so I can listen to birds maybe or whatever is around. And then I think, what should I do today? What's the priority for me today when I get at work? And then many days there will be meetings with different people. So there's a lot of people that I supervise for PhD students or postdocs, and I have those, but also a lot of international web meetings with different things I'm involved with, organization and things. And then in between, I of course do mails, and then I will usually most days be involved in working something on a paper. A typical day, I would discuss science with, 2 to 3 different young researchers or look at their papers or something. Yeah.
Okay.
And then in the end, I bicycle home. That's it.
And some hobbies, something you like and dislike to do in the afternoon or after the work?
Usually not after work. My wife is also a professor, just like myself, and Tyberg Hansen, and we both get home right late, so we put in many hours. But some hobby, I mean, what I do, research, is my hobby, so I like that. But what I do back home in the weekends is I enjoy very much my garden. I have a lot of flowers, and I like to go out there. That's very relaxing. If I have time to do it, if there's nothing pressing, I would do that during the weekend. Also, I like to travel a lot. I like to read, sometimes listen to music. I love spending time with my family, particularly. So I like the arts, to go to museum things, also performing art. Of course, it's less now because I'm involved in a few things now, but all sorts of performing arts, opera, ballet, classical music, things like that.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. And does this change somehow when you became the EAS president? Did your typical days change, or do you still have time to your hobbies and to your research even?
Oh, sure, you're right. Sure, I try, yeah. But I mean, I have a lot of stuff. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's a huge difference after becoming EAS president. I've always, I mean, basically every single day I try to do my best. So I do as much as I can, and when I get home, then I'm tired, and that's it, right? And then I wake up next morning, there's another one, so I try to do again stuff. So that has not changed, but of course now it's not only years, it's also being involved in many things internationally, which has increased as I have grown older, maybe because I've written more papers and more people contact me.
Yeah, okay. So this sounds like a pretty tight schedule, and because there are a lot of young researchers listening to us, do you have some recommendations or how to manage these multiple responsibilities at the same time? What are your tips and tricks how to manage to work with all of this?
I think it's important to what you do right now, do that well, and not think about the 25 or 100 other things you also could do. Do one thing at a time and do it very well. I always do that, and I can't multitask these different things. So do that. And of course, an extremely important thing is to say no. You should not say yes to everything. So although I probably have too much, but I still say no a lot, and I have done over the years. And say yes to the things that you really think are interesting, not because of some political reason why you think, oh, this would be nice, that person will think I'm important if I do so and so. But do what you really like to do. If you do that, then you'll get it done.
Okay, that sounds like a very good advice that even every single one of us should take something from it. And now that we know you a little bit more personally, I would like now to move a little bit to your academic journey. And what led you to focus on studying atherosclerosis, lipids, lipoproteins, and generally the cardiovascular disease? Why wasn't it oncology? Why wasn't it infectious diseases? Simply, what brought you to this cardiovascular field? And how your journey started? And were there some obstacles you have to overcome at the beginning? Or was it a smooth journey from the beginning to the end?
So why did I do cardiovascular disease and lipids? When in medical school for the first couple of years, I knew that I wanted to do research. There was no doubt this is why I studied medicine. And then, of course, quite early on, I was being aware that the two biggest killers in the world was cardiovascular disease and cancer. So I had this idea I would work with one of them. And then at one stage, I was invited to be part of a research project that was involved with cholesterol and lipoproteins. And then I said yes to that because that fulfilled one of them. And so I worked on lipids and cardiovascular disease a lot. But later in my career, I also worked a lot in cancer. So I have many papers in cancer. And also the third biggest killer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I also have a research area there with many people in our group that do these types of studies. So I'm also involved there. So basically, I wanted to work with something that were the big questions, the big diseases. And that's what drives me. Not some rarity, but something that could potentially influence or be important for many, many people.
Okay, so it sounds that from the very beginning you knew you want to be the clinician scientist together?
Yeah, quite early. Quite early.
And you said that you got some opportunity to go to the States to do the lipoprotein. So it brings us to another question that we all knew that in our scientific careers, the mentorship is very important.
Yeah.
So did you have some very good mentors? You are now remembering them quite well.
Yeah. And then also you asked the question, what was my journey here?
Yeah.
So I think that also comes, I would think of 5 different mentors, actually.
Okay.
The first one was my father. He was a researcher in agriculture research. He did experiments to figure out how can you best grow different things in agriculture in Denmark. So when I grew up, he talked a lot about science and how could you control and how do you do things. I even worked as a helper at that research station for several years in the summer and during the fall breaks. And then, of course, he told me about how did they design experiments and to be sure that it wasn't fault, there was no bias and stuff like that. So that was the first one. The second one was in medical school. I had a teacher in histology and anatomy, and he asked me if I would do a research project with him, so I did so. So I wrote 2 papers with him. That was on transmission and scanning electromicroscopy. He was good at telling me about how to write papers. And then I was asked to come for this third supervisor, namely one that invited me to be part of cholesterol research, like putting kinetics in the arterial wall. It was a person called Sten Stepter in Copenhagen, and I learned a lot from him. He was very good at being excellent at presenting things and making it simple, and also a very good thinker. And from there I went to, he had previously been at Cornell University of New York, and he organized that I could go there to a postdoc with a person called Donald Silversmith. That was a very, very smart person originally from Dutch Duke that went to Cornell and worked there. So I was there for 2 years, and he was sharp, so I learned from him about thinking well about data. And what is the good question and how can you look at data many different ways, also writing papers. And then from there I went to London to do a postdoc with a professor called Barry Lewis, who was he was actually the first person, the 2 first European Atherosclerosis Society lipid guidelines. He wrote them as first author. He just wrote down how he ran his lipid clinic at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. And he was good at using clinical biochemistry. He ran a big lab to do research at a big scale. So I think looking at him, I learned something about that, and also about a little bit about writing paper, but most about how to organize science and use big studies to do so. And then I came home to Denmark and had to be on my own legs, try from there on.
Okay, this brings us to our next question, because we are talking about a big study. So in 2003, you have been at the initiation of the Copenhagen General Population Study, and previously also participated in the Copenhagen City Heart Study. So can you tell us a little bit more about these 2 epidemiological surveys? That how many patients did you plan to involve? Did it fulfill your presentation or your expectations, that you reached what you wanted from these studies? Or what brought you to initiate the Copenhagen General Population Study?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that the first 10 years of my career, I just did animal work, mainly works in rabbits, what we used back then, cholesterol-fed rabbits and pigs, and also some rat studies, and a little bit in the Petri disk studies, in vitro studies. And only then I came into human studies working in London.
Okay, that must be an interesting switch for you as well.
Yeah. And then I teamed up also with my wife, Professor Anne Teiberg Hansen, to start doing genetic studies. And when we came back together to Copenhagen, we convinced the Copenhagen City Heart Study, which originally was started by her father together with 2 other young doctors back then in the 70s, to be allowed to get whole blood so we could isolate DNA from the Copenhagen City Heart Study. We did that in 10,000 individuals, which at that stage was by far the biggest study. And so we were early on with genetic studies of Mendelian randomization. And then one stage I could see for the future that would be too small. That's why I started the Copenhagen General Population Study here at Kheirkhah Hospital. Simply because, I knew the other one would be too small. And,
so the 10,000 wouldn't be enough. Yeah? So you reach higher.
Yeah, that's right. So I started with just convinced my boss, the one that had the job before me as professor. I just told him this idea, and he said, that's a good idea. Why don't you do that? So that was basically my grant. And so I started with 50,000, and then some years later, when I became full professor at my inauguration lecture, I changed the number from 50,000 to 100,000, and that's what everybody remembers. So now he said 100,000, and so we did 110,000, and we're in the process of doing it a second time now. Of course, today there's also the UK Biobank that is bigger, but now we often use the Copenhagen General Population Study together with the UK Biobank or some other open access thing. So I'm happy with the way it went. Of course, could always done better. The big vision I had one time to also find 100,000 people in Africa and 100,000 people in Asia, but I haven't done that yet.
Okay, that sounds like a bright future for the future research.
Well,
and is there currently some really new project that you are excited about that would be connected to the Copenhagen General Population Study, or to anything else that you would like to focus right now?
I mean, I think what gets me excited is to ask new questions that are important for many people, but also on a personal level to work with things and designs where I personally learn something, go new ways. It could be with new data, different statistical ways of looking at data and things. So I'm excited by many different things that I'm involved with. Right now, for example, I've been involved with a paper from the United States of America where something called the Family Heart Foundation asked me, together with my wife and Tybek Hansen, whether we would be involved in a paper looking at patients' data they have, I think, 320 million patients involved in that database. And there we looked at a study where we looked at Lp(a) for if you already had baseline ASCVD, how would you get a second one? And to look at these data with all this multi-ethnicity was sort of like a challenging thing. I think very interesting. But I have lots of other things that excites me.
Yeah.
Every day I have a new
So it's difficult to choose just the one that would excite you right now.
Yeah, I don't have just one.
Okay. And from what you said and from what you were talking, you were traveling a lot all around the world. So you were giving lectures there and listening to the researchers from here and there. So do you have some nice memories about these lectures somewhere, or some nice anecdotes from those different situations you have?
Yes, I love traveling. So if people invite me, I usually often say, if it's possible, I say yes if I can go. Now, of course, I get more and more invitations, so no, I have to say no sometimes. But also, it doesn't matter if I get a honorarium, I don't get a honorarium, or if somebody buys me an expensive flight, or sometimes I've even just paid the flight myself because I like to go out and contribute different places. Yeah, I think two anecdotes I can tell you. One is on the scientific content, the other one on the social content. So the scientific content was a cardiology meeting in Kyrgyzstan. That's a former Soviet republic next to China. And there's not very many people there, and they scientifically not so advanced. So there, when I came to give talk, I have some slides, and then I said one sentence, and then somebody stood next to me and translated it into Kyrgyz. Then I said another sentence, translated it into Kyrgyz, not even simultaneous translation or anything. And then talking with people there, the young doctors there, they have access to two journals, European Heart Journal and Atherosclerosis, because their professor was accident, and except for that, they had nothing. Then I think what a privilege to live in a country like mine, Denmark, where we just touch the computer and we have access to all the journals in the entire world, from a personal point of view, free of charge. The other anecdote was to go to a meeting in Brazil, Florianopolis, where it was a clinical chemistry meeting. And I'm a clinical chemist myself. I knew sometimes we can be a bit boring. People think about, well, how do you measure stuff correctly and things. And then at that meeting, it was just like any other meeting. Then they said, but there's this party Friday afternoon, you should come, it's very good. And then, and so I came. Of course, I always go to the parties and I always enjoy the social thing. And they come into this big hall, and I think 2,000 people there. There was something to eat. And then suddenly come on stage this band, and they start playing music, Brazilian music, fantastic. And everybody danced, even the old gray-haired professors, everybody danced. And the music didn't stop. They just kept playing for hours and hours, and everybody danced continuously. So that was a fantastic experience.
It must be a nice memory about it. And now, as you became the EAS president in January, now we would like to move to get a little bit more, a little bit more about this particular topic. So now you are the president of the EAS, and how did you first hear about the EAS? And do you remember your first EAS Congress?
I heard about it when I was in London, working with this Barry Lewis as a postdoc. That's a lot of years ago. That's I think 37 years ago or something. And then he said that he would consider, back then you had to be personally recommended by some senior scientist to be part of this. It was a small club in Europe, right? So he suggested I would be one of the members of the EAS. There was not very many, and there was a meeting every half year, 2 different places in Europe, probably with maybe a couple of hundred people or something. And one I went to Cagliari in Sardinia in the Mediterranean, and so I mean very few lipid experts came there, and it was, of course, the thing about coming and meeting some of these people that you have read their papers beforehand. That as a young scientist, that was a big treat, you could say, to talk with them, and even people good at talking with me when I came and asked them questions. Very famous names, people. Yeah.
Okay, and when does the society open this much? So you said it was the club at the beginning, and when does it begin, this society as we know it now?
No, I think just over the years it has been growing and more participants, and also at some stage anybody could just say they wanted to be members if they're interested. But now that they actually come back to be sure that we'd like to have somebody be members that are actively involved in something with atherosclerosis. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you reflect your first months in the role as the president?
I've also been president-elect for a whole year, right? So
that's true, but now you are the active president.
There's just there's a lot of stuff to take decisions about. There's an office with about 10 people employed, right? And they ask you questions. There's also an executive committee about 10 people, and we meet regularly and discuss many things to try to make it as good as possible. But it's fine. I like it. I think it's worthwhile. It's something you do as a researcher, to spend time doing stuff like that.
Okay. And what are your plans for the next 2 to 4 years? And do you plan to involve young researchers as us young fellows more actively?
I mean, plans. I think EAS is a good society. It has many, many good things, where the key things is the Congress and then also consensus papers or publications. These 2 things are key things, but there's many, many, many other activities. EAS Young Fellows, for example, should say, an outreach program, social media. Personally, I would love to involve young fellows a lot, but you have to identify the young fellows that not only say they want to do it, but they actually deliver. See, that's the thing. You meet many that would like the fame by having something, but not really want to put in the hours that it takes. So it takes a lot of time to do that, being involved in this, but it's also very rewarding. You get to know many people and you do things. So if and when I can identify EAS young fellows that are interested in that, I'm more than happy to involve as much as possible.
Okay, and one of these projects is also probably the Indian Lipidology Masterclass project. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Oh yeah, this was just one that I was... So I have also given many talks in India in different organizations. There's something called Lipid Association of India, but also the Cardiology Society of India, and through that, so I've given many talks there. And then this was one initiative funded by an Indian pharmaceutical company that's not here in Europe or elsewhere in the world to try. It's called Train the Trainer. So I prepared a talk where there was 12 different Indian lipid experts, and the lipid experts in India, they're very well read. There's so many smart people in India. The doctors, they all speak English, and there's many, many that I have the deepest respect for. So I gave a talk for them, and they commented on my slides so I could prepare them. And then in the end, we had a final slide deck, and then they used that each to train 10 or 15 other doctors somewhere in India. That again, each of these trained would train another 10 or 15. So in total, it should be like 1,500 Indian doctors that would be special, sort of like taught within lipidology. And I talk about all sorts of things.
Okay, so the EAS is expanding not to be only European, but also to be the worldwide a little bit, right?
Yeah, but we do that. But we have to keep Europe is where we come. So the Congress and the consensus papers and what we do for national societies in Europe is very, very important. But then we also expand out because now it's not only Europe, it's also the rest of the world have big problems with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease.
That's true. And this also brings us to our last session that should be more about your expert opinions about some topics. And one of these topics is the remnant cholesterol, because this concept is something you are presenting quite often. So could you introduce this concept to our listeners? What is the remnant cholesterol and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, so everybody in the world, I think most would know that cholesterol is bad for you. It's been the press. So cholesterol is a word if you want to say something about it. And we have, you could say, even been brainwashed that LDL cholesterol is the most important one. That's what doctors do. And then there was all the periods with HDL cholesterol, high density protein. And if you take all the cholesterol in plasma and you subtract HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, the remainder is remnant cholesterol. So it's just the cholesterol that has not been the focus clinically of anything yet. And when you look at it scientifically, that cholesterol fraction is at least as important in many patients for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease as LDL cholesterol.
Okay, so that was quite simple and easy explanation for our listeners. So, and now we have some kind of 5 rapid-fire questions for you. So first of all would be the LDL cholesterol or ApoB. What is the better risk marker?
ApoB by far.
Okay.
However,
what?
It's difficult to explain doctors and patients about ApoB.
And why do you?
As I said before, they know about cholesterol.
Yeah.
So you have to teach the whole world about ApoB. But the scientific question, ApoB is much better than LDL cholesterol.
Okay. And about LP(a), is it dangerous at 70 or only after 120 nanomoles per liter?
The risk goes up slightly after 70 nanomoles per liter, but then there's a gray zone up to 105, 120 nanomoles per liter, and from there on the risk goes up. But it is a continuous. The higher the LDL, the higher the risk. So I only count after 120 before it's really important.
Okay, and now about the statins. Are they underused, overused, or are they just misunderstood?
Underused by far.
Underused by far. Okay, and can you tell us about one molecule you are most excited about right now and in the next 5 years?
Yeah, you already said. It's not a molecule, it's a particle, remnant cholesterol. And why I'm excited is because I can see now that the world is taking it more and more serious. So I like to follow that and see how that reaches clinical practice throughout the world. And also randomized trial focus on that. So I think, of course, it's not new for me, but it's new for many other people in the world. So I'd like to keep pushing that for a while.
Okay, and the last question will be that one lipid-related myth you'd like to bust in 30 seconds.
Statins have, for practical purposes, no side effect. There's a myth that they have a lot when you look at it double blind.
When you look at the double blind, there is no side effect.
Oh, there's 1 in 1,000 get these muscle problems, but compared to other drugs, it's nothing.
Okay, so the side effects of the statins are
That's a huge myth.
That's a huge.
I'm not saying that people or patients come to you and claim about side effects. I'm not saying that they don't feel what they feel. It's just not because of statins.
Yeah. Okay.
For the majority.
So thank you for your answers. And now we are coming to the end, and we also, in this podcast, usually have the section dedicated to failures, which we call the graveyard of ideas. And most of the time, because we only hear about the success stories of other researchers, which sometimes makes us question ourselves. So we want our researchers and listeners to know that failure is part of the process. So we decided to ask everyone in this series to contribute an idea to our graveyard. So this could be the story of any grant you were passionate about and it didn't work out, or any kind of other failure you reached on the way. So is there something like that?
I think there's one thing that it's something where I put a lot of energy into it and nothing came out of it. This was the Copenhagen General Population Study and the Copenhagen City Heart Study. I've actually negotiated to get funding to do a whole exome sequencing a long, long time ago, before anybody else did it big scale. And by the same company that did it in the UK, Biobank, later. And then I had the contract signed, and Data Protection Agency, everybody has said it, but then I had to ask the National Ethical Committee in Denmark. And so I followed all the rules. I wrote down exactly what they wanted, and then they said no. I had to go out and ask all these 30,000 people again if they would accept that I do it. And then I didn't do it. So that was a lot of energy that went into nothing.
That must have been a big shock that it didn't work out.
I had to do something else. But of course, now we can just use the UK Biobank. It's open access, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for this incredible review, Borge. Thank you very much for sharing your time and ideas with us.
And thank you for being such a good interviewer and host. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much. And last thanks goes to all our listeners. EAS 2025 is now just around the corner, and we are thrilled to announce a special live podcast session that will take place during the Congress. And this is also thanks to the incredible opportunity given us by Professor Nordestgaard, our current president. So thank you also for this opportunity to have this session on the EAS Congress. And so if you are interested, you can join us at the EAS stage on the May 5th at 2 p.m. for an exciting live recording. We can't wait to see as many of you there as possible. And finally, we can connect in person. And again, thank you very much, Professor Nordestgaard, for joining us today.
Thank you.